All right, so for this Thursday night, week 3 item, we'll do part 3 and 4 of the HTML and CSS. So if you have closed out your browser since the last time we were together, then let's do something a little different this time. This is how I left mine. So I'm going to open just the private repo by itself. I'm going to do File, Open Folder. I'm going to navigate to that. I'm going to click on Private and hit Open. And why am I doing this? I'm doing this really just to show you the different ways you can look at it. And typically, when you're coding in here, right? And actually, I could have even drilled down further into the HTML and CSS and opened just that directly. And depending on, what you're doing, you might want to do that. So now that I have this open, I'm going to open the index file as we left it. And because since I was last in here, I have stopped my live server, I'm going to go ahead and hit the button at the bottom that says Go Live. Now I do want to show you something. If for some reason, and I may have already covered this under the attendance, but maybe not. If for some reason the live server doesn't work for you, one thing you can do is you can right click and you can say, in this case, reveal in. For Windows it'd be File Manager, for me it's Finder. And the thing about this is it opens up the actual operating system window, and then I could double click here. Now these two, notice the URL here, right? This is users, the folder structure that I have, and this is 127. This is what I was ending last time with, was the idea of talking about servers, right? So when you're working on a browser, you're considered a client, but in our case, we're using a plugin to also run a server locally. Now, the reason I like live server is what I showed you before, where it live reloads. The only time that didn't work was when I got rid of all the HTML and the browser had to create some of it for me. At least enough to show the page, right? So can you open them like this? Sure you can, and you can just hit refresh. I can just tell you there'll be times throughout your working with websites that you're going to want to have a live server or a local server, because you'll want to have that idea of what does it look like when something renders on the server, because it can be different for how it renders locally. For what we're going to be doing, you probably won't see much of a difference, but the more work you do in this area, you will. So I'm going to close the one that is just from me opening it up in the Finder or the File Manager, because I really like to work on the live server. I do want to say this as a precautionary tale. When I have you, which I probably will in a future or this week's group discussion or our discussions, give us your URL. You would never give this 127.1.1 this port 550 and then these directory, right? This folder structure. Because only you can see this. This is a server started on your local system, okay? And I've had this happen in the past enough to know that hopefully if I say it here, you'll not do that. But the idea here is that you only need to share you don't need to share this. You would share your URL that we created in week 2 if you were doing a web page to show us out of your public repo. But for submission, I already showed you how to give commit history. Okay. All right, so in here, I want you to have your notes open, right? I had you leave me with your thoughts, so let's go ahead and now set up week 3 Thursday, right? And so one thing I want you to do, and by the way, I went back and looked, and it's like if I wanted to do ordered list, it'd be like that, right? So I went back and looked at the cheat sheet because I wanted to. So ordered list. Now, the reason I'm kind of bringing these back is that we're going to talk about, maybe this time, maybe in this next one, ordered and unordered list. So I just want you to kind of have that reference. So it'd be one, or in this case, we've been using unordered list for what we're doing. Okay, back at VS Code. Now, DOM, okay? So you're going to give me some thoughts here because I'm going to tell you what this is. And if you've never heard it, it is really something that you hear throughout anybody doing web stuff. And let's just go ahead and do a search for it because it's helpful to know. As a matter of fact, I'm going to search Google for DOM, HTML DOM, okay? And when I get the results, I'm going to go to images because I think visually this might be more helpful. So when we're looking at, and by the way, you need to be taking a few notes too here. When we're looking at a rendered, right? So remember, look, the difference between what our markup, our HTML, our hypertext markup language, right, is not what it looks like when it's rendered into the browser, right? If we were to come over here and look at our body, we would see, and by the way, notice how when I roll over them, in this dev tool, something you'll learn more about as we move into some other content is that it gives you some visual hints and output for what that means. But notice how this markup and this rendered, even though it looks pretty close, it's not. This is a rendered page, right? The browser reads the markup and creates this page. And what comes out of that is called the DOM, the Document Object Model. Okay, so the DOM, Document Object Model, is a structure, right? And that structure is based on your markup. Okay, now in this case, there's different ways to think about this structure, but I think this is a fine way to look at it. So at the top level is your document itself. Okay, and then you have your HTML root element. Now, sometimes I call them tags. Interchangeably, you can hear somebody say element, and you'll hear somebody else say a tag. It really is the same thing. I think element's probably the better word to use, and I just haven't used it enough to have it be common for me. But just know that you can hear people talk about it either way. So when I was talking about last time your root element, your HTML, is everything then goes inside of that. And that's what this structure shows you. And so the head element then has a title element, and that title element has text. Okay? So this idea here that this is an element that is nested inside this element that has text is just graphically what we're showing you versus the HTML code itself when we were writing it here, right? So here's the document, the whole document itself. Underneath it is the HTML, right? So again, if we go back, and then everything is like if we were to say this is the parent, right? So here's your parent, and here's, so the root HTML is a sibling of the parent, the document. Head is a sibling of the HTML, right? And then body is a sibling of the HTML. So the other way not the other way, what I was talking about before when I was talking about the HTML was also these attributes, right? So we have an element, and then we have element A, which we'll write one in a minute, and anchor, the most common one we have. It has text, but it also has an attribute. And I introduced that concept, but I think it might be helpful to also look at it in terms of its structure, because really when we're writing HTML, we're creating a structure, a document structure. Okay, that's what we're doing when we're writing HTML. And then when we then have the browser open that HTML, it is going to render a web page, and that resulting web page is a document. And if you ever are down here and you happen to have your console open and you type document, right, and you could hit tab here, but you wouldn't hit tab actually, document. This actually shows you that this whole thing is the document itself. Okay, and this is we'll see this as you move into taking something like 93 where we're doing JavaScript. Although here, and also when we're doing 85, when you're going through that course, you also learn how to definitely use dev tools. But anytime, it is good to look at the console in case there's any errors on your page as well. Okay, let's come back over here, right? So now I want you to do your first commit, right? Your first commit here will be, DOM notes. Okay, so go ahead and do your Git workflow. Again, I'm not going to take the time because I know you have this. You'll commit because you should have had some notes in there for that one. Okay, so once you do that, again, you don't have to push yet. You can just have that in there. So now let's come into our index, okay? And inside of here, let's do a link, okay? So these are headings, which by the way, and we didn't even talk about the H1, the H2, and the H3. Typically, you only have one H1 in your whole a single page, although it's not a hard and fast rule, it's more of an organization. And then these are subheadings, and these are really important when we start to talk about semantic HTML, which we will do in a later class. But it's just good to know. I mean, you could see more than one, you just typically don't. So in here, let's do another, in this case, P. Okay, so P tag, paragraph tag is, of course, most common. You see it everywhere. It creates an actual line, right? So if I was to move back over to my document, my rendered document, it's not showing up for some reason. So I'll hit refresh and okay, this is good. Sometimes you may get this error. If you ever get this error, that means your live server for some reason took a bump. So what I would do is move back over to here. Well, it looks like it's still running, but I would stop it. I like when these things show up because this is like real world when you're doing stuff and that can happen and you're wondering what the heck happened. So I would stop it because the second time you click it, it stops it if it was live, and when you click it again, then it goes live. Okay, so this was what I was trying to show, and I'm going to go ahead and hit inspect here, and I'm going to put it back 200. Okay, just so it's a little easier to see. So this is, you can see now that when we write a p tag, it actually only it takes the whole line. So this is what we call a block level element. Okay, and these are block level elements. Okay. So if for some reason I was going to come in here, this would not be a block level element if, right? If I was to say somewhere like right here, okay? So what happens here is it gives me, it puts it on a new line, but it's not a block level element. You might wonder, well, how would I know that? Well, notice when I roll my mouse over, first, this is something you learn as you learn more CSS. So when a block level element is used, it takes the whole line. Typically, it blocks it out, right? So if you can see the same thing on the H1s and all this up here, but by doing a PR, right, it does a line return. BR, it does a line return so that even within this block level element, we can still get a line return. So I shouldn't conflate or confuse the idea of a block level element with a line return. Okay, so it's not a line because it could go over multiple what looks like lines here, and that's just the way that it renders onto the page. But let's come back over here because the whole reason I wrote this was so that I could show you, and I'm going to get rid of the BR for a minute, right? Let's do this. I'm going to do a tab, okay? And what this is your A link, your anchor, which is your most common. I keep saying that, but it's very common. And what I did there is I took the A, because notice what we have. We have an A, we have a ref, so we have an attribute, and now it's got to open and close. So this is just the base element, Okay, and then what goes between here would be whatever, right, link text we wanted to have. Okay, so when we do that, and I'm just going to show you that in here, there's a couple things you already notice here, right? One is because the block was right up against it, it does read one space, right? So I can get one space, but if I try to do multiple spaces, it will only read one space. Now there's ways to put spaces in there, but if you're trying to space something in here and you're hitting multiple spaces, just know that it won't work. There's other ways to do that with CSS and other techniques. So in here we're writing an A tag, okay? An A tag, an anchor tag, is going to then link to somewhere. And I'm going to do, let's do google.com, okay? Okay, again, I'm heading, it's saving automatically for me. It's reloading. And now, and I should have shown you this before, but now notice that the text is a particular color, right? And if we click on here, right, it takes me to Google. But notice what it also did is it took me off of my particular page. And you have seen this behavior when you've been browsing the web. You just probably didn't have words to talk about it or concepts to think about it. But in this case, if you're building a website and you're doing what we call an off-site link, a link to somewhere else, the other thing you would probably add is another attribute here, right? And you'd say target equal, okay, target equal underscore blank. And by adding this attribute into the aref, okay, now what's going to happen is when you click on it, now it's going to open it in a new window, or sorry, in a new tab. Could be, depending on how your browser is set up, but typically it's just a new tab inside of here. And so the thing, and the reason I'm showing you this is from now on, you want to make sure, and generally Canvas will do this for you when you put it in a link, but not always, okay? Okay, so now we've been introduced to a couple of elements slash tags, right? The paragraph, the aref, we have attributes on them. Now we've nested in here. I didn't have to nest them. I totally could have. But I think it's time for a moment for us to take a look at the HTML, the different tags. So I'm going to do this, and I recommend you do it with me, is MDN, which is the reference for all things web development on for anybody that's doing this. If you've probably, many of you have already heard of MDN. It's Mozilla Developer Network. And now I'm going to do HTML elements after that as a search term. And it's going to take me to a link to their site. And in here, it's going to give me a listing. And the last I looked, there's 142 different elements. Okay, this is the reference for them. And one thing you'll notice is some of these elements have a little trash can. And what that means, if you were to click into here, is that this is deprecated. Okay, basically means we know, it's a feature that's no longer recommended. You can still get it to work, but typically we don't write the font element in our HTML because that's what CSS does for us, and that's what this is talking about here. So again, just kind of look through here, and then now you see image, and you might think, well, wait a minute, image is very common. Well, it is, but it's IMJ that's more common, okay, than image here. So here's what I want you to do, and I'm going to end this here. I want you to look through here, okay, and I want you to find like 3 different elements, okay, and just put them on the page. See if you can get them to work. See if you, just by looking at them, right? And you can copy and paste from here as well, but I think it's better to code stuff because you get that muscle memory, but honestly, how would I know? Okay? So once you do that, again, I'm going to say 5. I want you to go through here, and I want you to pick just 5 different ones, read about it, okay? Look at the examples and think of how you might use something like that, okay? Don't pick stuff that's deprecated. Again, there's 100 and something in here, 100 and 46. So you can find different ones just to play with and put them on your page. Okay, now that commit, and again, just put them on this index page here, right? And I just again want you to play around with some of these. That commit, once you're ready, once you have that in your page, right, would be commit message playing around with different elements. Just playing with elements. How about that? Playing with elements. So we have two commit messages, and then I'm going to stop this one and move on to the next one, but I want you to spend a little time just checking some of those out.